All right. So anyway, thank you very much, Tom George, director of See How They Run. First of all, for bringing us the film and sharing it with us, and also, of course, for joining Film Club for this chat, and also to let you know this will be running after the film, so we don't have to worry about giving away any particular bits of information or surprises. But
Right.
there's so much to talk about here beyond just the intricate storyline that unfolds. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, it's just such a treat to see a film based on an original screenplay. You know, not another movie, not a novel, not a play, but an original script. And so we should take a moment to credit Mark Chappell for writing this. But
Mm.
how did you get involved? What was your entry point into this project?
So I had just finished the final series of a sitcom that I directed over here in the UK, which is called This Country, which is a mockumentary about two feckless cousins in rural England getting up to nothing and making mountains out of molehills. And I read the script. Searchlight sent me the script, and I immediately responded to it in a positive way. And they said, we'd come in for a meeting. And I'll be honest, I thought there's no way they're gonna get me to direct this film, coming from making a sort of lo-fi mockumentary. But, I thought, do a good meeting, then maybe in the future, they'll think of me again. And I guess sometimes that's like good energy to like bring to a meeting. So I just went in and sort of told them what I thought about the project, which was that I was really excited about the script already, but I could see some ways that Mark and I could continue to finesse it as we headed through what was still sort of development at that point. And long story short, there must have been a major admin error somewhere, and they got me to do the film. So, I got attached to the film, but of course, as you'll know all too well, that doesn't necessarily mean the film's going into production. And then the question was, well, who are we gonna try and cast in this movie?
Well, it's a wonderful cast, and I want to certainly get to them in a bit. But one of the things that I think makes the film delightful is there are all these little in jokes and Easter eggs and surprises in it. We have Detective Inspector Stoppard, which is obviously a call out to an Inspector Calls. We have real life people like Dickie Attenborough showing up.
Yeah.
Was it fun to have those little things throughout the script, and those little sort of treats for the audience?
Yeah, so fun. But at the same time, I think you need to be careful with those elements, that you're not too heavy-handed with them and you're not overplaying your hand at the same time. I think they can become the detail on top of the film, but if you're relying on them to make it a satisfying watch, you've kind of missed the point. I think you need, it's got to, Mark and I talked about it from the start. It's like you got to build it first. You got to build the elements before you can put your twist on them. And underneath it all, what most attracted me to the film was that it's a character comedy underneath a murder mystery. It's really the story of a partnership at the heart of it, and that was exciting, alongside the chance to take the murder mystery elements and make the film hopefully a satisfying thriller, but also weave through the comic elements as well, and to keep those in balance. That felt like the kind of challenge that certainly excited me.
Yeah, and I think you met beautifully throughout the film. It's an awful lot of fun. I just for my own weird satisfaction, please clear up. And I reran the scene twice. Is that John Cleese doing an uncredited cameo as a member of the cast when we see them all
No,
on stage?
at least not as far as I know. No, was in the Mousetrap cast who were on
Yeah,
stage.
there's an actor who doesn't even get a line. He's just sitting on the couch, and I thought, is that John Cleese? But
No,
I could
that
find
would have.
no reference to it.
What I can tell you about that, the cast of the Mousetrap in our film, at least two of them had been in the Mousetrap play in the West End itself. So that was quite a funny circular element to it. But no, not unless somehow John Cleese is in
He's
up at the film.
sneaked on stage.
Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned that before this, you had been doing this mockumentary comedy series for television. This is your feature film debut. Was it, what were the adjustments going from television to a theatrical film, going from, sort of short form comedy to a more expansive world?
Well, I suppose above all, it's a period setting, and that brings a lot of additional challenges, obviously in production design and costume, but also visual effects as well, the sort of invisible effects that you need to sort of create 1953 London in 2021 London, as it was. So certainly that was a challenge, but to be honest, it was reassuringly familiar. Whether you're making a lo-fi mockumentary or a high production value period piece, the decisions are the same that you need to make. I think, of course, you rely on your heads of department, considerably, and certainly their expertise in the sort of period realm. But for me, performance is always the most important element. And so I suppose the biggest challenge is, how do you create an atmosphere on the set that is protective but open and intimate to a point, and allows for play and looseness and improvisation, and all the things that that I end up, I think, in all my projects. How do you do that when you necessarily have this slightly larger machine kind of working with you to bring that period world to life?
And what was it? The cast is so much fun, but I mean, particularly your stars, Sam and Saoirse and Adrian. What was it like working with them? And how were they, bring their different styles to this?
Yeah, well, it was a total dream working with them. I mean, what's most satisfying, I think, about it for me is that you have these big stars of film alongside some great British comic actors, and they all come together and feel like a satisfying whole, I think. But yeah, I mean, the people you mentioned have their own style, their own technique, their own way of working. But that's always the job of the director, is to communicate how the things you want to bring to the project, how you want to bring people together, how you like to work, but also be, open to the fact that different personalities have different ways of achieving great performances, So, but the three people you mentioned were right at the heart of the production. Obviously, they are in terms of screen time and as characters, but they really led the way tonally as well. Saoirse, Sam, and Adrian, all three of them understood, I think, tonally what we were trying to do from very, very early on in the process, and that was kind of the hardest thing to communicate to the actors, because I think there's a version of this film where everything could be played quite arch and really lean into the theatricality a little bit. I was quite clear that I thought the tension in the piece lay in this period setting, but with a kind of quite modern viewpoint to it. The whole film only works if you know about the history of cinema, film noir, murder mysteries, the fact that The Mousetrap has been on in London for forever. So there was a clear tension in the script between this contemporary viewpoint and the period setting. And I felt like performances would be the key to that, a performance style that felt contemporary and had a contemporary comic sort of feel to it. And all through Saoirse, Sam and Adrian got that very, very easily without much persuasion, and were then able to kind of lead the way as we like built the rest of the ensemble out around.
It's fun to watch because they're all perfect in those parts, but they're all slightly different, and they're all and also doing slightly different things than I've seen them do before. And Adrian, of course, is giving maybe one of the bigger performances in the film, but then he's the ugly, brash American from outside, so that makes him stick out more. And Sam is very much doing this sort of, Ealing Studios, button down. And then there's Saoirse, who's just lovely, and it's just charming hearing her speak in her real accent.
That was one of the big, and that wasn't in the original script. It was scripted as a sort of London constable, as you might expect. But Saoirse was the first person who we took the part to, and from our first conversation, she said, "How do you feel about me using my own accent for this?" And I always lean towards people doing giving actors as little extra work to do as possible, particularly in comedy where you want that, their personalities come through, and that opportunity to try alternate things or try loose takes as you go. And the fact that we haven't heard Saoirse do her own accent very many times, and not since Brooklyn, I don't think, on film. She said, "Oh, the big reveal of this film is going to be that I'm Irish." So I was like, as soon as she suggested it, I was all for it.
And something else you talked about. I mean, obviously it's a period piece set in 1953, post-war London, which is not even nostalgic for our generation because we're born after that. So we can't even say, "Oh, I remember those days well." We don't. We're sort of at a remove from it.
Yeah.
But you're recreating that period, yet at the same time you're doing something very modern with the castings. Casting, for example, Black actors in parts that they would not have been cast at the time. What went into sort of that decision?
It was really interesting. Kind of across every department, we had to decide how are we going to reflect this. The tension that I mentioned before, which is that it's a period setting and it wants to feel like an authentic period world. But at the same time, there needs to be this contemporary thread running through it. That was kind of clear to me. And so kind of with every department, from costume, production design, music composition, we ended up having the same discussions about where exactly on that line we would land, and it was different for different departments. So in the case of costume, Odile Ditz-Moreau, the costume designer, and I made the decision that all the kind of silhouettes, all the cuts would be period authentic, but in terms of color, we'd give ourselves that license. And it felt like the West End world lent itself to that as well, that we could take a little bit of creative license with that. And that kind of discussion ran through all departments. Certainly in the case of casting, it was important to me as a Londoner that we reflect London as I know it, as a vibrant multicultural city. And of course, that the period of the 1950s and going back further in British history has also been substantially whitewashed. It's the films of that period and other more contemporary depictions of that period don't tend to show black characters and characters of color in general in the London milieu. But they were absolutely,
there was a huge.
They were absolutely there, exactly. And so So it felt like, you know, it was both accurate reflection of period London to an extent, and also a chance to pitch this quite clearly as a modern take on a period setting.
Another thing you do in mixing up the periods, which is a stylistic choice, a cinematographic choice, is the use of split screens. You know, were this a film that were this a 1950s film, we wouldn't be seeing that. You know, I only started seeing that in the movies probably in the 1970s sometimes with Brian De Palma and other directors. So what made you want to use that device?
That I had to give all credit to our editor, Gary Dolner. We actually changed editors midway through the project. I had a brilliant editor, Pete Lambert, who cut the film with me for the first sort of 4 or 5 months. Unfortunately, he had to step off for family reasons at a certain point, and Gary came on to help me finish the film. They have a very similar background and lots of connections of the sort of types of projects they've worked on, so it was pretty seamless. But when Gary came to it, we were definitely looking for, we'd already been playing with ideas for how we could handle particularly the transitions into the flashbacks, and then whether that could be extrapolated out somehow into a tonal element that ran through the film. It was Gary who suggested split screen, and I will fess up and say that at first I was resistant for exactly the reason that you say, which is, to me, I thought of Bullet instantly. I was like, you know, it's late 60s, early 70s stuff that it made me think of. But once we started to, I said, look, let's have a play with it and see where we get to. And once it became clear that, you know, what we weren't talking about was the sort of whiz bang split screens of a kind of heist movie, and we found that the frames, because they've been shot in a reasonably graphic way, and a lot of shots and reverse shots within scenes, they just work together in a really satisfying way, side by side, or on top of each other. There was the graphical nature of the compositions meant that it sort of lent itself to that two-dimensional approach of putting those images side by side. And so we kind of found a way that felt like it was, I think, hopefully struck that balance, as you say, between identifying it as a thing that would not exist within your stuffy, typical murder mystery, but at the same time didn't shift it radically into a sort of another genre, or try and pull it too far away from that. So it was kind of a serendipitous thing, like a great idea of Gary's that then sort of the way we'd shot the material lent itself to it, and then we kind of ran with it, and ends up, I think, hopefully doing a similar thing to the thing that I talked about in terms of costume, which is like feel on the one hand like a period film and a murder mystery film, but also just slightly unseated from the norm of those films, and feel like it hopefully keeps you a little on your toes as to what you're watching as an audience member.
Because that's true, because it works. Like, I think like any stylistic device, it's best when it works thematically too, and putting these two images at once on the screen, I think, is a way of telling the audience, we're coming at you with a lot of information, you have a lot of stuff to process, keep up, because there's a lot going on here. So I think it deepens
totally.
the film.
And I'm a big believer in that, in sort of in respecting the audience, and that goes to a lot of elements in this film. The density of the script, and sort of little Easter eggs that you mentioned at the top of our chat. Audiences are so cine literate these days, and I think that you can rely on them to pick up. I'm always pleasantly surprised at the things that people do pick up on, and particularly in a comedy. I think if you've got layers of comic elements and story in general, there's a satisfying thing as an audience member at, like, finding the things that you find. It makes the watch a little bit more specific to you, I think, you know, and that kind of is a guiding principle to a lot of the work, you know. For example, like the lack of close-ups of characters and showing people often in 2 shots or in ensemble frames, groups of characters. Of course, Saoirse and Sam so often together in a 2-shot, you know. For me, there's a style of comedy where you cut for the line and the reaction and the line and the reaction, and there's a place for that, but it creates its own rhythm. For me, it's always exciting to put some of that power for like timing, comic timing in particular, into the hands of the actors and to watch it then unfold. You know, there's comedy in the line that Saoirse may say, but there's maybe equal or more comedy in Sam's reaction to it. I love that experience of finding the thing that you find funny, because people pick up on, always find different things, you know,
Right.
and that's the joy of it.
Well, it's just a charming film, and thank you so much for sharing it with us. You're doing back-to-back interviews, but do you also have a project that you're working on now or about to start working on?
Writing at the moment and in development on a couple of things. So Mark Chappell and I are working on a new script together, which is very exciting. Co-writing this time. Yeah, we'd never worked together before, but really felt like kindred spirits when we found each other through this project. So excited to work together again.
Well, Tom, thank you for joining Film Club. Thank you for the film, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, bye-bye.